The usual crash of weights, a herald of a new set, was abruptly followed by a snide, drawn-out "Teesk." Sarah, halfway through a leg press, her jaw tight, recognized the sound. That specific, disdainful click of the tongue belonged to Marcus, the resident strongman philosopher of the free weights, who apparently considered women's bodies mere ornamentation, certainly not vessels for serious lifting. She ignored him, focusing on the fiery ache in her quads, pushing through the final reps. "Look at that, girls!" Marcus's voice boomed, deliberately amplified, reaching every corner of the gym. "Trying to keep up with the big boys, are we? Don't strain yourselves. Wouldn't want to break a nail." A ripple of chuckles from his cronies followed. Sarah completed her set, carefully guiding the considerable weight back into place. Her breath came in controlled pants, but her gaze was unwavering as she turned. Marcus was admiring his reflection, a biceps the size of a grapefruit flexing. His signature obnoxious bright pink shoelaces, an ironic counterpoint to his toxic masculinity, today glowed with particular vibrancy against his grim expression. "Some of us are actually here to work, Marcus," she stated, her voice low but piercing. The gym air seemed to thicken, a collective pause in the usual symphony of grunts and clangs. He slowly pivoted, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, I see. And what precisely are you laboring on, sweetheart? Preparing those delicate arms for a heavier shopping bag?" A woman on a nearby treadmill accelerated, her eyes wide. Even the relentless gym soundtrack seemed to dim. Sarah moved with deliberate purpose towards the squat rack, where Marcus had just finished. The bar was laden with more weight than she typically attempted, an unplanned escalation. But then again, a public lecture from Marcus hadn't been on her agenda either. She adjusted her grip, the cold steel biting into her palms. The sheer bulk of the plates felt formidable, an almost sacred silence descending upon the immediate vicinity. She drew a deep breath, visualizing the perfect form, the explosive power, the raw, unadulterated exertion. "Watch closely, Marcus," she growled, her voice now a low rumble. "This is what work looks like." With a grunt that signaled satisfaction more than strain, she lifted the bar from the rack. The effort was immense, her muscles screaming in protest, but she held it, the weight settling across her shoulders. Slowly, deliberately, she descended, knees tracking flawlessly, back ramrod straight. The searing pink of Marcus's expensive trainers blurred at the edge of her vision. Another grunt, a guttural expulsion of pure endeavor, escaped her as she drove upwards, knees locking, the weight momentarily suspended. Then down again, and up. Each repetition a defiant assertion. Marcus, for once, was speechless, his smirk replaced by a look of bewildered astonishment. Her final upward thrust was met with a series of relieved, almost joyful grunts that reverberated through the gym. She re-racked the bar with a triumphant clang, her chest heaving, a fine sheen of sweat glistening on her skin. "Happy grunts, Marcus," she said, wiping her brow. "You should try them sometime, far more satisfying than snide remarks." The clatter of dropped weights usually blended into the gym's symphony, but today, each clang seemed to amplify the tension. Sarah adjusted her grip on the barbell, the cool, ridged metal, a familiar comfort. She was midway through her set when Max's booming voice cut through the air, directed at a young woman struggling with a machine across the room. "Honestly, ladies, if you're just gonna pose for selfies, stick to the cardio machines. Leave the real work to people who actually know what they're doing." His words, laced with a sneer, landed like a punch. The young woman's face flushed crimson, and she quickly abandoned the machine, gathering her things with downcast eyes. A familiar knot tightened in Sarah's stomach. Max, a hulking figure with a perpetual scowl and an inflated sense of superiority, was a regular fixture. His targets varied, but his disdain for women in the free weights section was a constant. Sarah had often gritted her teeth, focusing on her own workout, but today, something snapped. The image of the young woman's humiliation burned. She finished her set, carefully re-racking the bar. The scent of sweat and antiseptic hung heavy. Max, now leaning against a squat rack, was regaling a couple of nodding men with another tale of female incompetence. His laughter echoed, sharp and derisive. Sarah walked over, her footsteps deliberately firm. "Excuse me, Max." Her voice was clear, cutting through his monologue. He turned, his eyes, usually narrowed in contempt, widening slightly in surprise. "Something I can help you with, sweetheart?" He smirked, the condescension thick. "Actually, yes." Sarah met his gaze, unflinching. "I was just wondering, with all your expertise, if you've ever considered how much energy it takes to constantly belittle others. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a far heavier lift than any of those weights." A hush fell over the immediate area. The clatter of weight seemed to mute. Max's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock, then anger. His face darkened. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but you need to mind your own business." "My business," Sarah replied, her voice unwavering, "is creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable pursuing their fitness goals, not just those who fit your narrow definition of serious. And frankly, your business is making this gym a less welcoming place for half its members." She gestured subtly towards the departing young woman. "Perhaps instead of pushing people away, you could try lifting them up. It's a much more impressive feat of strength." Max's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, sensing the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, the silent eyes now fixed on him. For the first time, his usual bluster seemed to deflate. He mumbled something unintelligible, pushed off the squat rack, and strode away, his usual swagger replaced by a hurried retreat towards the locker rooms. The gym, for a moment, felt lighter, the air less oppressive. The clanging of iron on the floor and the rhythmic thud of feet on treadmills formed a cacophony that usually soothed Amelia. Today, it felt like a relentless assault, each sound amplifying the knot in her stomach. Across the free weight section, Chad, a man whose ego was as inflated as his biceps, was holding court. His voice, a booming bass, carried easily over the gym's din. "Look at 'em, fellas," he sneered, nodding towards a woman struggling with a set of shoulder presses. "Little tiny weights. What's the point? Women come in here, lift a feather, and think they're strong. Gym's for real work, not a fashion show." Amelia's grip tightened on the barbell she was unracking for her deadlifts. Her trainer, Marco, caught her eye, a flicker of warning in his expression. She'd been working for months, building her strength methodically, silently. Chad's dismissive comments, often aimed at women, were a festering annoyance. "You know what, Chad?" A new voice cut through the air. It belonged to an older woman, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, who had just finished her own set of squats. "Some of us aren't trying to impress anyone with how much we can ego lift. We're here for ourselves." Chad merely scoffed, turning his back as if the conversation was beneath him. Amelia, however, felt a spark ignite. She loaded her bar, adding 2 more plates than she'd planned for her first set. The cold metal pressed into her palms as she positioned herself, feet shoulder-width apart. She could feel Chad's smug gaze on her back, a silent challenge. Taking a deep breath, she focused. Her muscles tensed, a familiar ache blooming in her thighs. With a grunt she pulled, the weight resisting, then yielding. The bar rose smoothly, her form impeccable. She held it at the top, a silent defiance, before lowering it with controlled precision. Chad's laughter had died down. A few of the men around him, who had been chuckling along, now watched Amelia with unreadable expressions. She completed her set, each representative a deliberate statement. As she racked the bar, the satisfying clang echoed through the gym. She turned, her eyes meeting Chad's. His face was a mask of surprise, his usual swagger momentarily deflated. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the usual gym sounds. Amelia allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. Sometimes, Action spoke louder than any shouted insult. The clang of weights echoed like an unwelcome gong as Clara stepped onto the gym floor. Her usual morning routine, a quiet communion with the treadmill, felt off-kilter. A new, imposing figure dominated the free weights section, a man whose brawn seemed to stretch the very fabric of his tank top. He wasn't just working out, he was performing. Each lift was punctuated by a grunt, a flex, and an almost theatrical glance around, as if daring anyone to challenge his dominion. Clara, a creature of habit, settled onto her preferred treadmill. From this vantage point, she overheard snippets of his boasts to a younger, clearly intimidated gym-goer. "Women just don't have the drive," he scoffed mid-bicep curl. "All that cardio, no real strength. What's the point?" A tremor of irritation ran through Clara. She'd encountered this type before, but never with such blatant, casual disdain. Her gaze drifted to a young woman struggling with a set of light dumbbells nearby, her face a mask of quiet determination. The man's words, intended for the younger male, had clearly landed on her too, leaving a faint flush on her cheeks. Clara finished her run, her mind churning. She usually avoided confrontation, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. But today, something shifted. As she moved to the stretching area, she saw the young woman, tears welling in her eyes, quickly packing her bag. The man, oblivious, was now critiquing another woman's form, his voice dripping with condescension. Clara walked over to the young woman. "Hey," she said softly. "Don't let him get to you. He's just noise." The girl sniffled, avoiding Clara's gaze. "It's just, he's right, isn't he? I'm so weak." Clara knelt, meeting her eyes. "No," she stated, her voice firm. "He's not right. Strength isn't just about how much you can lift. It's about showing up, day after day, and pushing your own limits. And trust me, you're doing exactly that." She paused, then added, "If you ever want a spotter or just someone to talk to, I'm Clara." The young woman offered a weak smile. Clara then turned, a new resolve hardening her features. She walked towards the free weights, not to lift, but to stand. She met the bully's gaze, a quiet challenge in her own. The air crackled with unspoken tension. He smirked, but a flicker of surprise crossed his face as she didn't back down. The weights clanged again, but this time, Clara's presence was a more resonant sound. The scent of stale sweat and disinfectant hung heavy in the air as Sarah approached Max, who was meticulously re-racking weights. His biceps, perpetually flexed even at rest, rippled beneath a tight-fitting tank top. "Max," she began, her voice a little breathy, "I need some advice for my next session." He turned, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Still struggling to keep up with the real athletes, huh, Sarah? Thought you'd have given up by now. Most women do." He gestured dismissively towards the cardio section where a few women were on ellipticals. They stick to what they're good at. Light work, gossiping. "You're trying to run with the big dogs." Sarah felt a familiar prickle of annoyance, but she pushed it down. "I'm not giving up. I need to push past this plateau. I'm thinking of increasing my deadlift." Max scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "Deadlift? For you? That's adorable." "Look, Sarah, here's my cruel advice, as you ladies like to call anything that challenges your delicate sensibilities." He leaned in, his voice dropping conspiratorially, though still loud enough to carry. "You want to silence the internal doubts? The external expectations?" His eyes flickered to a group of men bench pressing, then back to her. "Lift less. Seriously? Go to the pink dumbbells, do some bicep curls, maybe a few squats with just the bar. Don't strain yourself. You'll feel better, less intimidated, and frankly, you won't be taking up space on equipment serious lifters need." Sarah's hands clenched into fists, her fingernails digging into her palms. The advice wasn't just unhelpful. It was a deliberate jab, a calculated attempt to undermine her confidence and push her out of the weight room entirely. He was telling her to retreat, to accept her supposed limitations, to embrace the very stereotypes she was fighting against. The metallic clang of weights dropping punctuated his words, each impact a hammer blow to her resolve. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "That's not what I'm going to do." She turned on her heel, the oppressive gym air suddenly feeling a little lighter as she walked away from Max's smirking face. His cruel advice hadn't broken her. It had ignited something fierce and unyielding. The next session wouldn't be about proving him wrong, not entirely. It would be about proving something to herself. Sarah's palms were slick, a stark contrast to the rough knurling of the barbell, the clanging of weights, the rhythmic thud of feet on treadmills. It all faded into a dull roar as she stared at the squat rack. Mark, a behemoth of a man whose every utterance seemed to drip with condescension, was holding court beside it. His latest pronouncement, delivered with a booming laugh that echoed off the high ceiling, was about how women were only good for cardio and light dumbbells. A few snickers followed, mostly from his sycophantic hangers-on. A knot tightened in Sarah's stomach. For weeks she'd endured his thinly veiled jabs, his dismissive glances, but today, something snapped. 40 years of quiet resilience, of biting her tongue, combusted into a searing resolve. She glanced at Maria, a young woman who had visibly flinched at Mark's comment, her eyes downcast. That decided it. Taking a deep breath, Sarah walked purposefully towards the squat rack. Mark, mid-sentence about the inherent weaknesses of the female physique, paused, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He clearly hadn't expected her to approach. "Excuse me, Mark," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She picked up a 20 kilograms plate, then another. "I believe this rack is free," Mark scoffed, his gaze sweeping over her with an air of dismissive superiority. "Looking to rack up some pink weights, Sarah? Don't strain yourself." His cronies snickered again. Sarah ignored him, loading the plates onto the bar. "Actually," she replied, her voice gaining strength, "I was planning on doing a few sets of 80 kilos. But thanks for your concern." A hush fell over the immediate area. 80 kilos. Mark's jaw tightened. He watched, a vein throbbing in his temple, as Sarah meticulously set up the bar. She stepped under it, positioned her shoulders, and with a grunt, lifted it off the rack. Her muscles strained, but she held it, steady and defiant. Then, with controlled power, she descended, her knees tracking perfectly, her back straight. She pushed back up, completing the representative. 1, 2, 3. Each representative was a silent answer, a powerful retort. Mark's face, initially smug, slowly contorted into a mask of disbelief, then grudging respect, then something akin to shame. The snickers had long since died. Maria, standing a little taller now, offered a small, encouraging smile. Sarah finished her set, carefully re-racking the weight. The gym, for a brief moment, felt hushed. Mark cleared his throat, his usual bluster replaced by a low, almost inaudible mumble. "Impressive, Sarah," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. He then turned and, without another word, walked away from the squat rack, his entourage scattering behind him. The air crackled with a new energy. Sarah, though breathless, felt a profound sense of calm. She had stood tall. The scent of stale sweat and disinfectant hung heavy in the air, a familiar perfume to Maya. She was mid-set on the leg press, her muscles screaming in a satisfying burn, when the booming voice cut through the rhythmic clank of weights. "Still struggling with those baby weights, sweetheart?" Mark, the gym's self-proclaimed alpha, was leaning against a squat rack, a sneer twisting his features. His usual audience of two sycophantic young men snickered on cue. Maya ignored him, her focus unwavering. She pushed through her final rep, the plate shuddering before locking into place. As she racked the weight, she straightened, meeting his gaze with a calm that unnerved him. "You know, Mark," she said, her voice clear but not loud, "it takes a lot of strength to be kind. More than any weight you'll ever lift." His smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," she continued, walking over to the water cooler, "that lifting heavy things is easy. Being a decent human being, that's where the real challenge lies. And frankly, you seem to be failing that test spectacularly." She poured herself a cup of water, the ice clinking softly, the only sound in the sudden silence. Mark's face flushed. He was used to women shrinking under his gaze, not dissecting his character. "You think you're so smart, huh, old lady?" Maya took a slow sip of water, smart enough to know that true strength isn't about how much you can bench, but about how much respect you give to others. She turned to the two younger men, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Don't let anyone tell you your efforts aren't enough. Everyone starts somewhere." The younger men exchanged glances, a flicker of understanding in their eyes. Mark, robbed of his usual power dynamic, mumbled something inaudible and stalked off towards the free weights, his sycophants trailing uncertainly behind him. Maya watched him go, a faint smile gracing her lips. The gym seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. A woman on a nearby treadmill gave her a thumbs up. Maya simply nodded, then headed to the lat pull-down machine, a quiet victory humming within her. The scent of disinfectant and old sweat had always clung to the gym, a familiar but unwelcome perfume. Today, however, something felt different. The air, usually thick with the thud of dropped weights and grunts of exertion, held a lighter hum. Sarah, her 40-year-old muscles protesting slightly from yesterday's session, surveyed the room. Fewer eyes were glued to phones. More people were spotting each other, offering quiet encouragement. She found herself beside Maria, a shy woman in her late 20s who usually kept to the treadmill. Maria was attempting a set of bicep curls, her form a little shaky. "Keep your elbows tucked," Sarah offered gently, demonstrating with an imaginary weight. Maria's eyes widened in surprise, then a small, grateful smile touched her lips. "Thanks," she whispered, adjusting her stance. The shift wasn't just in the atmosphere, it was in the dynamics. Ethan, the self-proclaimed king of the free weights, was conspicuously absent. His usual spot, where he'd loudly critique women's form and scoff at their efforts, was now occupied by a group of younger men, focused on their own lifts, occasionally exchanging tips with the women nearby. The oppressive cloud of his judgment had lifted, replaced by a quiet, focused energy. Later, while stretching, Sarah overheard a conversation. "Did you see his face when Coach Miller told him to leave?" A woman chuckled, cooling down on the mats. "He went purple." "Yeah, and then when he tried to argue, Sarah just stood there, arms crossed, like a silent bouncer." Another added, clearly impressed. Sarah felt a flush of warmth. It had been an impulsive act born of years of simmering frustration, but seeing the ripple effect felt profound. The gym, once a place she tolerated, was now transforming into a community. Even the music, usually a relentless throb, seemed to have shifted to a more varied, less aggressive playlist. She caught Maria's eye across the room. Maria, now confidently pressing a set of dumbbells, gave her a small, triumphant nod. A happier gym indeed. The clanging of weights and the rhythmic thud of feet on treadmills usually filled the gym with a monotonous hum, but today, a different kind of tension vibrated in the air. Sarah, sweat beading on her forehead, adjusted her grip on the barbell. 40 years of life had taught her a thing or two about enduring, and today that lesson was about to be tested. She'd deliberately chosen her brightest pink workout top, a defiant splash of color against the muted grays and blacks of the gym. "Still at it, sweetheart?" A sneering voice cut through the background noise. It was Mark, leaning against a squat rack, arms crossed, a smirk plastered across his face. He was an intimidating presence, all muscle and condescension, especially towards women. Thought you ladies would have given up by now. Pink's a nice touch, though. Really, Screams? I'm here to look cute, not lift heavy. A few heads turned. Sarah's jaw tightened. She felt the familiar sting of his words. But today, something snapped. She met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. Funny, she said, her voice clear and steady. I thought Pink screamed. I'm confident enough not to care what insecure men think. Mark's smirk faltered slightly. He clearly hadn't expected a retort. Oh, a feisty one, are we? Let's see how feisty you are with some real weight. He gestured to the squat rack next to hers, where a significantly heavier barbell sat. I bet you can't even budge half of that. A hush fell over their immediate vicinity. This was it. The moment she'd been anticipating, dreading, and secretly preparing for. Sarah walked over to the heavier bar. The steel felt cool beneath her fingers, the knurling biting into her palms. It was a daunting weight, a personal best, and then some. She took a deep breath, focusing on the weight, on her form, on every fiber of her being. The vibrant pink of her top seemed to radiate, a silent declaration of intent. She positioned herself, bracing her core, her muscles taut. The first representative was a grunt, a slow, controlled descent, then an explosive drive upwards. The plates clattered as she racked it. 1, then 2, 3. Each representative was a battle, a silent defiance against Mark's judgment, against every dismissive glance she'd ever received. On the fourth rep, her legs trembled, but she pushed through. The pink fabric stretched taut across her back. She racked the bar, her chest heaving, but a triumphant glint in her eyes. Silence. Even the general gym noise seemed to have abated. Mark's jaw hung slightly open. He looked from her, flushed and powerful, to the heavy barbell, then back to her. His face was a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. Well, he mumbled, clearing his throat, I guess I stand corrected. The usual bravado had completely evaporated. Sarah simply wiped the sweat from her brow, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Never underestimate the power of pink, Mark. She turned and continued her workout, leaving him standing there, silenced, a valuable lesson learned. The air in the gym felt lighter, charged not with tension, but with a quiet, undeniable victory.